Our members here in Greater Philadelphia area are in the fields of business professional services, finance, technology, accounting, marketing, and many other professions. And our mission really is to provide quality professional programming and serve as a collective voice for those business communities and to discuss topics of importance to the Pan-Asian community. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Wen Nanin, Corporate Credit Portfolio Manager at Lincoln Financial Group, to say a few words.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Mitika. My name's Wen Nanan, and I serve on the board of Ascend Greater Philadelphia together with Mitika on the programming committee. And however, today I will represent Lincoln as I'm a senior director, portfolio manager at the Lincoln Financial Group, which is the sponsor for the special event celebrating AAPI Heritage Month. And on behalf of Lincoln, I'll share a few quick words about our company. So Lincoln is a Fortune 200 publicly traded financial services firm headquartered right here in Radnor, Pennsylvania. And for those who are local to Philadelphia area, I trust that you have heard or have been to Lincoln Financial Field. That is where the Philadelphia Eagles play. And we have over 12,000 employees, and we serve over 17 million Americans. And the purpose of the company is to provide financial peace of mind to millions of Americans through our offerings of life insurance, annuities, retirement planning, and group protection products and services. And Lincoln was founded with the endorsement from President Lincoln's son, Robert Todd Lincoln, with the written permission to use his father's name and likeness to represent our lofty goals and the mission. And can we go to the next slide, please? And speaking of the company, I wanted to just highlight here our DEI focus. And we are very proud of what we have been doing on DEI front. And for a 12,000 people company, we actually have 10 people who are dedicated in our DEI efforts, led by our Chief Diversity Officer, Allison Green. And we have DEI business partners that work with specific function areas. And we have people specializing in providing DEI insights and tracking our progress through data analytics, make us accountable. And we also have 2 DEI-focused talent acquisition managers focused on diverse hiring, outreach, internship, early talent programs. And I just wanted to highlight here also on the right that you see that Lincoln has received a number of awards acknowledging the accomplishment and the impact we have made on the DEI front. We have been voted as one of America's most responsible company by Newsweek and is a top 100 companies for remote workers in 2022. And speaking of our DEI, and I also wanted to highlight just at the bottom of the page, our business resource groups, which are the BRGs. These are employee-led groups with members throughout the company, helping embed diversity and inclusion in the company's culture from the ground up. And the BRGs organize a number of events every year and provide great opportunities for all employees to meet with new people, network, and make an impact in further our inclusive culture. And all full-time and part-time employees are welcome to join any of these BRGs. Now, lastly, for the next page, I wanted to share the QR code here. So you can use your camera and scan the QR code to join our talent network. And we also have Alicia Campbell here with us today on the call. You can feel free to connect with her directly here or afterwards if you wanted to learn more about Lincoln. Now, before I pass the mic back to Elaine Chen, I just wanted to also share a little bit personally. I did watch the film together with my family this weekend, including my almost 10-year-old daughter. And it is such a heartfelt and inspiring story. And we learned so much from this film about early Chinese immigrants, segregation in the South, and the friendship between the Black and the Chinese American communities in Mississippi. So I was very glad that my daughter found that as fascinating as I did, and she asked a lot of great questions too. So with that said, now I would like to introduce Elaine Chan, President of Ascent Greater Philadelphia and the SVP of Global Commercial Banking at Bank of America. And Elaine will also introduce our two speakers today and then moderate the Fireside Chat.
Thank you. Thank you, Wen. Much appreciated. I love your feedback about the film. Thank you for joining us. All of our audience today, listening from wherever you are. We're here to celebrate the Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. We're going to take a moment to pause and reflect on our heritage and what does it mean to be Asian. We're delighted to welcome Larissa Lam and Baldwin Chiu, filmmaker of Far East Deep South, a documentary of the Chiu family's personal journey of discovery of their roots in the Mississippi at the beginning of the Jim Crow era, and that's around the late 1870s. While their story is a story of Chinese Americans, the AAPI Heritage Month celebrates all of us who identify as Asians, whose heritage are drawn from a myriad of countries and cultures that spans 30% of Earth's total land area, home to 4.7 billion people, and roughly 60% of the world's population, with over 49 plus countries and territories represented. And today is about celebrating each and every one of our cultural ethnicities and the richness of our individual heritage. The one binding thread that draws us together is that we are Americans, whether we adopted America as our new home or as descendants of those who came before us. And what incredible stories we weave. You're going to hear one of these amazing stories today. Thank you, Larissa and Baldwin, for joining us. So by way of introduction, Larissa and Baldwin is a wife and husband team. Larissa is the director, writer of Far East Deep South, co-producing the film with her husband, Baldwin. She's the winner of the Mary Pickford Award for Outstanding Achievement in Filmmaking, TEDx speaker, and an accomplished singer-songwriter and composer for film and TV shows. Baldwin Chiu, you and your family are the subjects of the film, which has been featured on NBC News, PBS, and NPR. Baldwin is a rapper known by his MC name, Only One, as in W-O-N. He is a professional engineer who gained recognition for his viral videos, Cantonese Boy and I Want to Be an Engineer. Baldwin's songs were featured in the video game Sleeping Dogs and the film Dead Man Down. So that makes quite the power couple. Congratulations to the both of you for your tenacity and courage in developing this very personal story, born out of the desire to learn about a significant piece of your family history, namely your grandfather's connection to Mississippi. So for those of you who may not have caught the screening of the whole entire hour-long documentary, we're going to play a 2-minute trailer before we kind of jump into the fireside. And the screening will continue to remain available today all through to tomorrow. So with that, Ani, would you mind playing the trailer?
Growing up, it was always kind of a mystery about my dad and his side of the family. Whenever my brother and I would ask him about my grandfather, he would just say, oh, it's a sad story, it's not a big deal. One day we came across this photo of a gravestone, and that's when my dad finally told us that this is where my grandfather and great-grandfather were buried. But not in China, in Mississippi.
Chinese people in Mississippi? What happened there?
I actually don't know where we're going and where we're going.
Last thing I thought I'd ever find in Mississippi was a Chinese museum.
I guess there was more than just my grandfather and my great-grandfather.
When the Chinese first came to the Delta, they were treated like we were.
Everything was very segregated. I mean, it was black, white. We were just really in the middle.
I had to attend a segregated one-room schoolhouse.
Growing up, I read about segregation, and I thought that it only affected the black community.
I just didn't really think that it happened to the Chinese too.
What?
Great-grandpa!
Oh my God!
your family.
It is so important for people to know what happened with the Chinese Exclusion Act and how it affected Chinese Americans throughout the nation, including the South.
Thank you, Nee. Thank you. And Larissa and Baldwin, welcome. Thank you for taking the time to join us.
Of course.
So it's, I wanted to give you all a moment here to introduce yourselves. So Baldwin, Larissa.
This is Larissa, and
Hi.
she is my wife.
Yes.
And she's the director of our film because she gets a lot of practice directing me on our daily life.
Ha ha ha. Actually, the first time we went to Mississippi, he told me to just stay out of the way, take care of our daughter who was only 1 at the time, let my family, find everything. You just stay out of the way.
Just be the babysitter.
Yeah, exactly. So apparently I eventually didn't listen.
Which is normally what happens.
I did stay out of the way until, if you've seen the film, as things started to happen, I'm like, what's going on? Why is there a Chinese museum in the middle of Mississippi? Why are all these people coming out of the woodwork who know your family? I have no idea what's happening. I thought we were just going to a gravesite and your family was only going to be the only people there in the cemetery. What is going on? There's all these Chinese that we never learned about in Mississippi. So yes, I ended up stepping in and directing.
Wonderful. And Baldwin?
I guess I'm Baldwin.
Oh yeah, I should introduce you. This is Baldwin. He's my husband. As Elaine mentioned, he also raps and beatboxes. And we have a daughter. She's 8 years old. Our background is in the music industry.
You pretty much saw her grow up in front of your
Right.
eyes in that 1 hour and 10 minutes, 15 minutes.
But you also have a background in engineering as well.
I do have a background in engineering, which actually project managing all these major projects made it pretty easy. Well, it was a relatively graceful transition into producing film.
Because you're basically project managing.
Managing a film.
Right. And I used to be a CFO, so there's a whole long history behind.
We have some professional experience as well.
Well, I really meant it when I said the power couple. You guys are highly skilled in a lot of areas, and I think the film basically captures a lot of those talents. So we'll delve right into it. We have some questions prepared for Larissa and Baldwin, and hopefully it will give our audience some little insights into why you made the film and your experiences you drew from that whole experience. So let me first kick it off with my first question, and that is, it's amazing that you're so willing to share a very personal story. I think as Asians, I would say we are a very private race in general, and you're able to capture this emotional roller coaster as you took us through all the twists and turns of a detective story. And at one point, your father realizes that his father had never forgotten him and wrote about it tenderly in a letter to a friend. It's clearly a very, very private moment, along with so many other private moments in the family's discovery. So for everyone listening here, we all yearn to discover our roots. It's a fundamental human need, I think, but it's also a very private journey. So can you tell us, why did you decide to make the film and what motivated you to want to share it with the world?
Yeah, I think it definitely stemmed off, kind of mentioned in the film, how, I saw my daughter being held by my dad and not having that grandparent relationship ever in my life. It really kind of sparked this journey. But I think even more deeply, as you might have seen the film, I didn't want my daughter to have to go through the same thing that I did, what my brother did, what my dad went through, my grandfather, my great-grandfather, and what most likely my great-great-grandfather did in the U.S. At some point, we hope that our sense of belonging, our acceptance into American society and culture becomes normal. And I feel like a lot of the stuff that we faced in our past, and many of us probably faced in our past, is because people don't know our history. People, like you said, my dad didn't want to share his history, so he didn't. And a lot of times he didn't share it because he didn't know it. And and he didn't know it because no one told him of it. And so the cycle keeps going and going. So I think Larissa just really wanted to break that cycle.
Well, I think it's that adage, you know, if we don't tell our stories, no one will, or someone will
else
tell
will.
it in the wrong way or inaccurately. And so I think it's up to us. And for so long, you know I was raised, my parents were born in China, went to Hong Kong, and then came to the United States in the 1960s, which is the other type and quite common, you know, immigration pattern that happens. So I'm, you know, I'm the daughter of immigrants, and I think as a daughter of immigrants, we always had that sense of, you know, being treated as a little bit less than, quote unquote, truly American. And so when I discovered that there was this rich history in the Mississippi Delta and other neighboring southern states of the Chinese contributing there and even being subject to the same segregated laws that you know, other communities were subject to, I thought to myself, I learned American history. I never heard about this. And personally, growing up in California, you know, I took the class, I took AP history, I got an A, I even passed my AP test, but I never felt a personal connection, I think, to American history because I never saw myself in it until I stepped into Mississippi. And that's a big reason why we made the film. And we didn't know we were going to make a film because it was just a family vacation at first. And then this is what happens. We were musicians and now we are historians and documentarians.
Right. And how did you get over the, you know, the private part of the story? You know, you want to tell the story, but, you know, how did your dad feel about sharing his innermost side to the world?
Well, at some point, we were actually trying to not use him as much because we know he was very shy about being on camera. And then when we showed earlier versions of our film, people kept asking, we want more Charles, his dad. You know, they thought like, he's the most compelling part of the story. And it really was his journey. Whereas I think in an earlier version, we focused on a lot of the other people that we met along the way and their stories. But everyone kept wanting to know, how does Charles feel? How does he, you know, what's this journey been like? And so I kind of had to tiptoe around him a little bit. And a lot of the footage that you see wasn't even supposed to be in the film. Like when we were looking through photo albums in the, you know, in the dining room at your parents' house, he was just telling me all the photos. So when I used them in the film, I would know who everyone was and we could put it into context. But then it became something where it revealed a lot about him in recalling those memories and his story.
Yeah, I mean, definitely his mood has changed. I mean, even in the beginnings, he didn't really want to talk about the past because, first of all, I mean, he didn't really know that much, and what he did know was painful. And so, just a little insider: all the scenes that you see my father in the film, I was not there.
Where he's by himself.
Where he's by himself and doing his interviews, I was not there because he would not talk to me about those. Those all her.
He likes me more than you.
He likes her more than me. Yes, that's probably
right.
Yeah. I think I just asked nicer. I think that's maybe what it is.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But it did take a while for him to finally come through and be like, "Hey, okay, you guys can share our story."
Right. Yeah, and you know, I'm quite aware that, you know, some of our audience may not have had a chance to view the screening, so maybe we can jump to the next question to give some insights around, you know, your grandfather's story in the context of the whole Asian immigration to the United States. So maybe a little bit of a history lesson here. And as I mentioned earlier, your story takes the immigration story beyond Ellis Island, right, which we all know is the point of entry for many immigrants throughout history in the United States, but you're taking us into the Deep South. And so it really opened my eyes that here are two minority groups, the African Americans and the Asian Chinese, who were just earnestly seeking to make a living, putting their children to school. And in the Black community, they were just so happy to be able to buy food during segregation. And they found the Chinese merchants were very happy to serve them. And then they sort of just like found each other in this very, you know, challenging environment, and they found support and friendship in one another, which led to this sort of beautiful symbiotic relationship, which grew between the Asian Chinese and the Southern Black community. So, you know, when you're telling this lived experiences of your grandfather, what becomes apparent is this complex picture of race relations in the South and the plight of Chinese immigrants who found a place in this African American community, and the Chinese became this go-between, the blacks and the whites, and the Chinese themselves were barred from most of the white businesses in school. And this is just so fascinating to me. And for somebody who never realized the Chinese had a presence in the Mississippi Delta, could you talk a little bit about what you found to be the most intriguing aspects of the relationship between the Asians and the African Americans that ensued during the Chinese immigration in the midst of segregation and the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things is that there was a feeling of mutual respect between the communities, which you don't often hear of. And a lot of it too is the fact that these stories weren't told in this history, hadn't been documented, and apologies to probably a spam call coming in.
Spam, sorry.
That the fact is, because both communities were in a sense living under the rules of the dominant white society, we heard a lot of stories of a lot of backroom deals, a lot of things happening under the table between the Black and the Chinese community, when it was not just, the Chinese loaning credit, but there was also bartering involved, where it was like exchange of goods,
And
exchange
services.
of services with one another. In fact, we learned about a man named Josie Collins.
Yeah, you kind of see him in the back on our poster here. He was not really in our film, but he definitely was a critical person in our family's life. He actually worked in my grandfather's store. At the same time, my grandfather worked on his farm.
Hosie's farm.
Hosie's farm. So, there was a time in our history where Chinese were not allowed to own land. Yet the Black community was able to own land and have their own farms. And so it was a exchange of services. Both of them understood that they needed each other. And I think it extends us, if we go a little bit further back to where, why the Chinese ended up in the South anyways. It was because of replacement slave labor, and they were working. That's why the poster has cotton fields, because we had a common sharing of in history of sharecropping and working on cotton plantations. And so that
and other plantations,
and many other plantations, and
crops.
having that understanding about each other's suffering and hardships, I think that allowed them to build those relationships.
That's amazing. I mean, that's not something you think about when you think about Asians and Black relations. It's really fascinating that there is this organic relationship and friendship that grew up because of circumstances that they faced at the time. And there were obviously a lot of commonality in their background and their sufferings that brought them together. So that's truly inspiring. It seems that there's so many layers in your family that sort of came across in this film, Baldwin, and one of them is your grandfather's name, Casey Liu. We saw a short bit of that in the 2-minute trailer, but that wasn't his family name, right? After all, it's Chiu, right? Your last name, and the Chinese Exclusion Act profoundly impacted families, and would love to hear how the story, this idea of a U.S. piece of legislation personally impacted your family to the degree that it separated your grandfather from his son, and his inability to emigrate to the U.S. because of it. And then if it wasn't for your superb detective work, your father would have continued his lifelong grief of bitterness toward his parent, his father, who seemed to have abandoned him, without a single afterthought. So as we found out, this was hardly the case. So would you please share with us what went on behind the scenes, when you ended up discovering the connection with the name Casey Liu? And Baldwin, how do you feel about the legacy now, that sort of got wreaked upon your family by the Chinese Exclusion Act, and that your grandfather left behind this beautiful legacy in Mississippi. So how do you reconcile all these truths?
Well, definitely there's a good scene in the film that kind of explains how the name went from from Chiu to Lu, and then we had to flip it back and go back to Chiu. And it's one of those weird things with immigration and even just people in general in the United States, where they don't understand that our family names come first instead of last, and so hence the mix up there. But I think when you're talking about the Chinese Exclusion Act and how it messed up our family for generations, I think it's one of those consequences that people don't think about when they hear about different laws. And in our case, and it really was a separation of father and sons throughout our entire history in this country. My great-great-grandparents, because of the Chinese Exclusion Act, my great-grandfather had to leave California to go to Louisiana, Mississippi. So that, because of the Chinese Exclusion Act, there was so much hatred for the Chinese in the West Coast that it drew my great-grandfather to leave to go to Mississippi. So that's the first family separation of father and son.
Well, and father and mother. I mean, sorry, son and mother and son, right, too.
Yeah. And then Charlie Lu has to go to China because of the Chinese Exclusion Act and their Page Act, and couldn't have women. There weren't enough women here. Go back to China to get married, try to bring the family here, but then those same laws would not allow his son to come over until much later. So again, another family separation from great-grandfather and grandfather. And then they finally bring my grandfather over, and they're together. But then the Chinese Exclusion Act is still happening. It's been happening for so long that he goes through the same experience that Charlie Lu, my great-grandfather, goes through. It has to go back. And it happens multiple times.
And the Chinese Exclusion Act it put in effect in 1882. It was only supposed to be for 10 years. They renewed it in 1892, and then they made it permanent after that until it was repealed in 1943. And so there's generations and generations of that impact. And honestly, after it was repealed in 43, you still had restrictive immigration policies that only 105 Chinese could come in until 1965, when the Nationality and Immigration Act was passed. And so, there's a lot to unpack there, and the impacts you just had no idea. I think most of us, I didn't know growing up. Going back to the history, we didn't learn. We didn't learn. Now some schools are requiring to learn about the Chinese Exclusion Act, but I still don't think you really learn the impact of it until you really dive deep into it.
So can we talk a little bit about how you sort of come to your place of peace? You know, did this documentary help you find that peace? And, how do you reconcile? Because, it went on for generations. It really damaged your family, not just one, but, a couple of generations. And you are now stepping in to repair it so it doesn't repeat itself. So it's a really difficult thing to see something like that happen in your family. But I just wonder, how do you make peace with all of this?
Yeah, I think as it only takes one generation to break up a family, it only takes one generation to try to heal a family. And so I think once my father realized that, hey, maybe he wasn't really abandoned, there was this bigger thing that he had no control over, it allowed him to forgive. And I think that's one of the biggest things that we don't really talk about much in our families, because we usually don't forgive each other. We just try to forget about it or sweep it under the rug and just move on.
Suck it up is what David Dunn says in our film.
But I think forgiveness really needed to happen. And I think for me and my dad's life, I didn't understand my dad growing up. We had a lot of tensions, and I think I really needed to forgive him. To okay, he had no idea how to be a father. He never had a father. I never really thought of him not having a father would affect how he was a father to me. So I had to forgive him. And then now it's my generation with my daughter, to make sure that everything I've learned in the last several years about our history in America gets passed down to her, and that she never feels the same way I felt. She never feels the same way my father felt, or how Casey Lu, my grandfather, I don't want my daughter to ever feel that way. And so I think I'm reconciled, because I know that we all, not just myself, but America, does have the capability to make a change. We can address the hardships and the darkness of our past. We don't have to forget those, or sweep them under the rug, or coat it or whatever. We can still know that was there, but we live in a country where we have the opportunity to make it better. So I could define our family and our future by the hardships of our past, but that doesn't do anything for the future. We need to I want my daughter to be defined by the greatness she can become because of what we are allowed to do in this country now.
What a wonderful response. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. So my last question here is about our image, our perception as Asians in America as being the perpetual foreigner. And and yet, as you demonstrated in this film, our struggles and contribution has been so much part of American history that remains unknown. Ascend, we embarked on a campaign about a year ago called The Other Side, and it's a way to encourage our members to tell our story, as you have. And through these narratives, we hope we can build more effective bridges in the workplace and the communities we live in. So if you think about, all the ethnic races over the generations that have made America home, so the Irish, the Germans, the Jews, to name a few, they all suffered terrible discrimination at the beginning of the immigration. So do you believe there is a level of active acculturation that as Asians, we should lean into it and adapt and assimilate and adopt American way of life, just as the Southern Asians have done, to find our sense of belonging?
Well, I think Baldwin has some very strong thoughts about this, but I'll start and then he can inject. But I believe that what's important is, I think there was always this old thinking of you have to assimilate to be fully accepted. And by assimilating, you have to abandon your homeland and your native culture to be accepted of American, whatever that means. And in a sense, that was a little bit of a wrong view, because what is American? Because if you're really truly looking at who really is American, it really falls into the indigenous, Native Americans, correct? Because everyone else came here from somewhere. And now I feel like we're in a slightly better place where I think we need to encourage people to say, you can be American by citizenship, but you can still retain your heritage so that you're fully both. And that's where you mentioned the Italian American community, or like it's, Irish community, like they have been able to do that. And many of them, unfortunately, have lost some of their heritage. But I do know friends who can say I'm proud to be Italian because their grandparents were from Italy, and no one blinks an eye, and no one ever goes up to them and says, where are you from? Where are you really from? And, wow, you speak English so well. No one says that. We haven't gotten to a point, as a culture yet, but we hope we can get there so that people can recognize this face and not automatically think we're not from here.
Yeah, I mean, we have the affordability and the luxury in this country to where now we could have new immigrants come into this country and never have to have any relationships with anybody else that doesn't look like us. But I'm not sure if that's a good thing. Because what you see in Mississippi and what you have seen over there was that you had Chinese, Black, white, and even Mexican and Middle Eastern all living in the same area, where they were forced to get to know each other and live with each other and work with each other. How hard would it have been for any of those grocery store Chinese people that were running those stores to not speak any English and say, like, I'm going to just keep my own culture and not learn English? How would the Black community befriend Chinese friends and have them sit in the balcony with them, as Willie talked about in the film, if they didn't speak English, right? That doesn't mean they don't have to speak Chinese, right? And I think what I learned throughout this process is, even as I was growing up, I would wonder, do I have to pick when I'm Chinese and when I'm American? Who considers me American and who considers me Chinese? And do I even have a say into who picks that for me? I think after this whole experience, and understanding our history and our place in America, I think it's perfectly in our right, and it should be in everyone's right, to fully understand that we can be both 100% American and 100% wherever our ethnic heritage takes us. And it really comes down to, we're not assimilating in the sense of getting rid of what we are. We're assimilating so that we can be a part of what everyone is also. And they don't have to be in conflict.
Yes, indeed. Well said. Well said. And I know that our audience has a myriad of experiences to share. And I think, anyone who are descendants of immigrants or immigrants themselves have an incredibly rich background. It's almost, almost you can listen to it as a storytelling session. And I wanted to invite our audience to, share some of the experiences and ask Larissa and Baldwin some questions. So I'm going to open this up and see if there are any questions. Please, put your questions in the Q&A and we'll grab those from there. So before I ask one more question while we wait for the questions to queue, let me ask Nee, are there any Q&A questions in queue here?
Yes, we have one question so far. Why did your grandfather not contact your dad after he moved to
Mississippi,
yeah.
So, first of all, unfortunately, my grandfather passed away at a young age, and so my dad was only 8 or something like that.
I think he was about 8 years old. Yeah.
Yeah. So there wasn't that many years that my grandfather could have contacted my dad. Also, you got to recognize this is the early 1900s. It wasn't like he can just shoot him a text on or go to WhatsApp or WeChat,
or even pick up the telephone,
or even
necessarily.
pick up a phone, even, right? So it took a lot longer for letters to go. That there probably could have been some letters exchanged,
and I think
to the mom.
Your dad told me that there were letters that were exchanged. Unfortunately, he doesn't have any of the letters, so it was amazing that we found the letter in the film. Spoiler alert for anybody that hasn't seen it yet. But there, he was able to get that, and from what he told me, because we asked him the same question, he was just so young. And whatever he heard, he had to hear it, secondhand from his mother, because he, at that age, wasn't able to, read anything. And even though he had some photos, that were given to him over the years, in his mind, he kept thinking his dad didn't love him. His dad had abandoned him. In fact, even after we went to Mississippi that first time, we were sitting around with the Dunn family, who had the ones that had bought the store, his grandfather's store. And after he had heard and found the letter and found all this evidence of his, father's love, he still was like saying, why did he have to leave? Why did he have to leave? And so that,
and this was before he even understood the full context of what
the Chinese Exclusion Act did, right? But that he was a 75 at the time or something. I mean, 70 plus years he had lived with that hurt of feeling that his father didn't love him, didn't want him. He couldn't understand why his father could just come back to China, why he couldn't go to the United States.
Here, right?
And and by the end of the film, as you see, he's gotten to the place where he has a better understanding of it. But man, that hurt ran so deep.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yep. Nee, any other questions?
Our next question is if the documentary will be available online or on DVD.
Yeah, you could definitely get a DVD now if you just go to fareastdeepsouth.com. I think you can also drop a link. But we do have personal DVDs available for people to purchase now. And we love the DVD because I know a lot of people don't have DVDs anymore. But we have bonus scenes. We have scenes that we cut out. We have other historical figures talking about what was going on during that time. We get a lovely director's commentary where you get to hear Larissa's beautiful voice for an hour and 15 minutes. Alongside with, you get backdrop on why and how we came into all these discoveries. So yes, the DVD is definitely available to purchase on our website, fareastdeepsouth.com. Online, PBS has, if you have membership to
PBS Passport,
a slightly shorter version is available there.
And then, of course, Canopy.
You can put that link in there. Canopy is through your public library, or if you are working in academia, if your profession is in academia, a lot of universities have Canopy, as Canopy with a K. We did sign with educational distribution first because we believe that educating people is the most important way for people to understand who we are. Advocacy and all that stuff is great as well, but for us, we felt like for our story, educating starting from young people all the way to even the elderly, finding those opportunities. So Canopy through universities and public libraries is another way you can get access. And we're working on some other ones.
And certainly I dropped the link in the chat too to subscribe to our updates. And we also have a screenings page. We are doing some in-person screenings as well. We're actually going to be in Milpitas, we're actually going to be in Sacramento at the National Genealogical Society's conference
On
this week.
Friday.
And then if you know anybody in the San Jose area, we'll be in Milpitas, California, which is next to San Jose, on Saturday for a free screening.
We'll be there live in person.
Right. And if you know anybody in Wichita, they're doing a screening as part of the Tallgrass
That
Film
is
Center.
online, yes. That's online
and in person.
So we're going to be zooming in over there for their in-person one, but then we did a pre-recorded one for their online one.
So that information is on our website.
So yeah, follow us on our website. There's a lot of different
There's
ways.
always updates.
And we're hoping for more as we go. And
Awesome.
then places like you guys. I mean, thank you so much to Ascend for hosting things like this. We're doing a lot of corporations.
And there's a possibility for going to the Ascend convention that you may get to see it there too, in person.
Awesome. Awesome. Yes, we can't wait. We'd love to have you all in person at the convention. So I know there's some work being done there. And any other questions? Because I've got a question myself. So is there anything else?
We have a few, yes.
Okay, go ahead.
So we have an anonymous one saying, thank you for sharing your story. And I imagine this may not be unique to Chinese Americans in the Mississippi area. Are there ideas or thoughts on seeking others across the country and capturing their stories?
Yeah, I mean, is that for us? Like,
is that for us
capturing, or other people capturing the stories?
I mean, there's definitely other filmmakers that are trying to capture other stories that are across the country and throughout the country, because there are a lot of stories we just don't know about. But do you want to tell them about a future other story?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so
different region besides Mississippi.
Yeah, so we're gonna be hopefully capturing another story soon here. You guys had the opportunity to watch my father's side of the family and our lineage here through him. We recently found out about a year and a half ago about my mom's side of the family, and it turns out we just recently discovered this is that my great-grandfather was a transcontinental railroad worker who ended up being in Denver, Colorado. And he unfortunately did not, he left to do the same thing, get married, bring his family back over, but he was not allowed to come back in. And the Chinatown was decimated. So Larissa's got a bright idea in making a new sequel.
Yeah, I think someone else asked about what our next project is. So our next project will be about his mom's side of the family and what happened to the Chinese in Denver, Colorado, which is, again, another place you don't necessarily associate with Chinese. And we joke that would be Far East Rocky Mountains. That won't be the final title, but that we're joking.
It's not as nice as Far East Deep
and
South.
And we'll get into a little bit more, I think, about the Chinese Exclusion Act, the anti-Asian riots, and even the contributions of the railroad workers, which we didn't get to unpack, entirely because we were focused more on the South, because certainly there's a lot more history to explore.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Yep. So would you have done something different after the making of the film based on what you learned? Would you have highlighted anything differently?
Well, one of the things that I think we would have loved to have included, it was the story we talked about Josie Collins.
Oh, yeah,
Well, we had his photo. We just didn't know who he was until after the film was done. And one of the things that I think came out as we were screening it, and we did a lot of test screenings already prior to the release of the film, and we had several African-American friends and filmmakers and consultants who saw the film, and we were already alerted to certain sensitivities that the community had. But more than anything, I think you don't really know until you show it to more people. And so, one of the areas of sensitivity that the Black community has is that, especially if they grew up in an urban setting, is not everyone, but, a small percentage do feel that a lot of Asian, especially immigrants, business owners see the Black community as transactional, like they only want to make money off of them. And so we went back and we actually, it was the version that they saw that has the fix. So on some of the lower thirds, it was something that we could easily do. I went ahead and made, the extra effort to change some of the titles. We had some of the Black community members being labeled Chinese grocery store customer. And it's a very subtle thing, but I went back and changed it to Mississippi resident as opposed to associating them only as a customer. And I went and I changed, I had somebody, Joan Walton, who was, who had gone to the store, was friendly with the family. Originally it said friend of Casey Lou. I now said customer of Casey Lou to put it on equal footing for the Black and the white community, because we didn't want to show that there was, such an imbalance in terms of like the relationships. And also, I know in our personal relationships, which is also why we included the Black story, is, we are blessed to have many, many close African American friends. And, I never think of them as the stereotypes as I see. I never think of them as transactional. Like, they are truly my friends. In fact, just this past week, I lost a very dear friend of mine who was like my little brother. And just last month, I lost another friend who was African American, who was like a big brother to me. I mean, they are family to me. And so I didn't want any hint that there was going to be issue, even though it was a small percentage of people who felt that way. It was enough that I didn't want that to be an obstacle for people to see that, this was a true relationship in terms of having friendly relations and not just a transactional one. Yes, of course, there is transaction, but it was not in the way they think about it today.
Great, thank you. Please share tips how both of you raise your child as an American and as a Chinese, and how you share your story as a human being.
Oh, wow. Thank you. Well, I mean, I definitely, I tell my daughter I love her every day, like 100 billion times. So she definitely knows I love her. I don't think I ever really heard that from my dad. I mean, he does it now, which is
he does it now
cool.
after the movie, so that's
After
one
the
change.
movie, that's another change. But I definitely didn't want to be one of those stereotyped, Asian parents that just assume that the kids should know that we love them because of all the things we do for them. So that's one of the things I really do. And I want her to be very proud of who she is as an American, but her Chinese is actually better than mine because we put her into a Mandarin immersion school. So I speak Cantonese, but my Mandarin is horrible. Her Mandarin is way better than mine. In fact, her English is actually way better than mine too sometimes. But we made sure that she went to a Chinese immersion school, not so that she can be like indoctrinated into becoming more Chinese, but because that school had predominantly non-native speaking students going there, which included her first friend in the school is Black, and they learn Chinese together. And so I'm making sure that she is exposed to other people of other ethnic backgrounds, that she's okay and comfortable with being able to understand and speak different languages, and not thinking that if she speaks Chinese, that makes her a foreigner. No, she's speaking it because it's a part of her heritage, but also it's another thing for her to learn. So and
it gives her a competitive advantage. So that's the business economics major in me. No, I mean, and I would just add that, we actually get that question a lot. And I think it's something that, I hope this film does help immigrant parents, address kind of the relationships in raising American kids, because I think our parents didn't know what to do. And I think by the fact that when people come to this country, you have kind of left a culture and you can't expect to retain, being Chinese. And I think a lot of times the way we were raised, it was like, oh, you got to stay Chinese, make sure you stay Chinese, don't be too American, don't lose your Chinese culture. So much, there was such a fear of that.
But then you had the opposite extreme for some people.
For some where they're like, don't, like, you have to fit in, you have to fit in, you can't be Chinese, or don't
speak any Chinese.
They're not going to treat you the same, they're going to treat you less and inferior if you keep, showing that you're Chinese. And so I think it's about that balance of encouraging both to be proud of your heritage, but also be embracing of your Americanness. I think that's where the healthy medium is, and exposing them to the history and that sense of belonging. And I'll just say this one last quick thing, and I know because I know there's more questions, but being cognizant of even the language we use and how we refer to things. Like, I noticed my parents always said, when they said American, I know they didn't mean us. Oh, those Americans. So, but I'm thinking to myself, my parents have been American citizens longer than they, were in China. And I was born here. And so that language and even our own community thinking of ourselves as foreign or the other. I mean, it's important how we frame our own community. And even things like asking, I know like Asian parents tend to ask kids like, well, what did you do at school? Or, how'd you do on a test? My parents never asked me how I felt. And as kids, honestly, we never asked our parents how I felt, because I was the only one, or how they felt. Like, I'm the only one who asked your father how he felt. Right? You're like, what did you do? Yeah. And so I think even changing in that language is starting to ask one another, both goes two ways, is asking one another how we feel as opposed to just what we do.
Thank you.
Luba asked, yes,
thank you.
That's at CCCM. What's that stand for? It's like a church.
It's a church in Milpitas.
Chinese Christian
And it is,
church.
and I will drop the link.
Yeah, we can drop that link in there.
It's on our screenings
And there's
page.
an ice cream social there too.
Yes, it is. So
and we have some. We know we have some
for
students.
our screenings. Yeah, I dropped the link. If you go to our fareastdeepsouth.com screenings page, you can find out when that's
the address. I think it's like 1 o'clock in the afternoon.
Yes.
And then, but the main thing is the ice cream. Well,
yes.
No, the main thing is us.
No, we'll do a discussion. We'll be doing a Q&A afterwards.
But you get ice cream. That's the main thing for my daughter. Ice cream social, yes.
Nice. So our final question is, when are you opening the Far East Deep South restaurant?
Oh, I love that question. I think that's the first time.
It's supposed to be a food truck, right? I think that's like, we're going to do a food truck.
Well, maybe that's a good name for the food truck. That's a great idea. I had an idea many years ago. It's called the Chiu truck. It's a Chinese bayou, Chinese in the bayou. It's a southern food truck.
Because there were Chinese that were in Louisiana. Because your great grandfather had spent some time there.
Yeah. And I would have like a black bean cod po' boy sandwich, right? We would use jambalaya, but with lapchung and
the Chinese sausage.
And Chinese sausage.
Which apparently lapchung is now a thing that even non-Asians know, because I was watching the Food Network and they were using lapchung. I was watching Chopped. I don't know if any Chopped fans there. And that was one of the ingredients was lapchung. Yeah. And I was like, my gosh, these people know what that is.
But we did do a session where they talked about this thing called something mean.
Gosh,
there's a southern noodle that is that like black people love. But it's Chinese inspired.
And it's inspired from New Orleans.
From New Orleans.
Yeah, but we definitely, we definitely have lots of ideas, and maybe one day the restaurant.
Yes, the Far East Deep South food truck or restaurant.
But in the meantime, I mean, one thing, before we kind of sign off is we definitely want to let you know about our First Class initiative, which you could go to our website, Far East Deep South, to learn about other screenings. As you mentioned, we also drop links about our social media if you want to follow us. But the one thing that we're also doing is something called the First Class Initiative, where we understand a lot of public schools are underfunded and don't have the funds to license our film and bring our film into their classrooms. So we started something where we are doing grants to have teachers bring our film to their classroom for free for the first time. And so if you know of teachers in schools in your area that would benefit from watching the film, we also have a free discussion guide that they can use. Please let us know. I'll drop the link there. But also, if you want to contribute, or if some of your companies even have, employee matching funds, like we are raising additional funds for this First Class Initiative campaign to be able to continue to give schools that are underfunded the ability to watch our film and discuss it in their classrooms.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. Thank you. And I'm afraid we have to wrap. I love the questions. Thank you to our audience for asking some really fun, insightful question. And Larissa and Baldwin, what an inspirational project. And we look forward to more. Thank you so much for sharing your story here. I think at this point, I am going to hand off to Medika to get us all wrapped up. So Medika, over to you.
Thank you so much, Elaine, and thank you so much, everyone, for joining the discussion, and Larissa and Baldwin, thank you so much for that very engaging and insightful discussion. And once again, we would like to thank our sponsors, Lincoln Financial. And just very quickly, as a reminder for our next event will be on June 15th at 3 p.m. Eastern, and it will be on the topic of allyship and belonging in the workplace with a focus on Asian-Black relationships. And then we also want to thank you again for joining, and just remind you of a few ways to connect with us on social media. You can connect with us through any of these handles on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. Thank you so much, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.